Well, the gospel question is, if you believe in evolution, does that apply to your faith? Teilhard de Chardin, whom I assume many of you might know, is the esteemed French Jesuit priest who was a famous anthropologist. And he wrote this poem titled The Slow Work of God. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient with being on the way to something unknown, something new. And it is the law of all progress that it is made only by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances acting on your own good will make you tomorrow. Only God can say what this new spirit will be. Give God the benefit of believing that His hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. Now, as I was writing this homily a little bit ago, my 94-year-old mother-in-law, Ruth Diamond, was laying, and is still laying, in a hospice bed nearing the end of her life. I've known this woman for the 50 years I've known her daughter, my wife Mary. Back in the 60s, there was a television show called Ben Casey, MD. Anybody remember that? Okay. You remember how it started? There's this old doctor, he looked like he was 150 years old, and he'd get up there and he had a blackboard. And then he'd say, and he'd write the symbols as he said this: birth, life, death, and infinity. The profound stages in every human existence: birth, life, death, and infinity. Well, the impending death of my mother-in-law is a profound experience, certainly for Mary and her 5 siblings, and certainly for their mother. It was assumed weeks ago that she had hours to live, and as the hours turned into days and the days turned into weeks, there was a certain degree of confusion and anxiety as all concerned wondered how long this ending was going to take. Would the end come today? It didn't. Would it come tomorrow? It didn't. Would it be this week? It wasn't. Would we be keeping this vigil for only God knows how long? Well, that wore on Ruth, and it wore on her children. But it seemed to me that something wonderful was happening during this time. And while it would have decreased the anxiety for death to pay its visit, I personally am so grateful that it did not happen to anyone according to anyone's timetable except God's. I'm not going to go into details out of respect for my mother-in-law and her family, but I can say that Ruth, like all of us, like all of our families, had her strengths and had her weaknesses, her assets and her liabilities, her goodness and her sins. And in these past several weeks, I witnessed a number of miracles. The miracle of forgiveness, asked for, given, and received. The miracle of self-acceptance. The miracle of love, freely given and freely received. The miracle of reconciliation and union. And it occurs to me that these miracles would not have occurred if Ruth were to have died according to anyone's timetable but God's. And that's why the poem by Teilhard de Chardin hit me like a ton of bricks. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. And the well-known story of the Israelites being fed with manna in the desert is an ancient story, trusting in the slow work of God. The chosen people were eager to leave the slavery imposed on them in Egypt. And it's probably a good thing that they didn't know beforehand that they would wander in the wilderness 40 years before finally coming to the promised land. Perhaps they would have said, "No thanks, we'll just stay put." We see signs of this in this early part of their journey in today's reading, where they, quote, grumbled against Moses and Aaron, complaining that they had been better off as well-fed slaves in Egypt when they ran out of food in the desert. Even though they were an impatient people, their God was not, and he provided food for them in the desert. Now, how often have we received something good from God only to grumble down the road when things weren't working out to our satisfaction, yet to discover further down the road that things eventually worked out for the best? And I think we could each give multiple examples of that. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. In the second reading from the letter to the Ephesians, we see another example of how hard it is to trust in the slow work of God. The Ephesians were urged to, quote, put away the old self and your former way of life, and to, quote, put on the new self created in God's way. Now, apparently this takes a bit of time. It's tempting to turn back to our old ways of thinking, our old ways of feeling, our old ways of acting when the going gets tough. Transformation for many of us is a very slow process. Surrendering my own ego so that I might put on the mind of Christ does not seem to happen in a nanosecond. I must trust in the slow work of God operating in my life. And in our gospel reading, we see a people who eagerly accepted the gift of physical bread that filled their stomachs, but were slow on the uptake to grasp the notion of embracing Jesus as the bread of life that would fill their souls for all eternity. It took a while for them to get it. I think it takes a while for us to get it. We can only trust in the slow work of God until we get it. All of creation is moving toward perfection and completion. The world and the universe is evolving. Culture and societies are evolving. Communities and churches are evolving. Humanity is evolving. And you and I are each evolving. God forbid that any of us would have the same level of spiritual maturity we did when we were 5 years old, or 20, or 50, or 70, or however long we have on this earth. It seems abundantly clear to me that our spiritual development is utterly dependent on the slow work of God. It was true for the ancient Israelites. It was true for the people of Ephesus 2,000 years ago. And it was true for the people who saw Jesus in the flesh. And it is true for us today. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We like to skip the intermediate stages. We're impatient with being on the way to something unknown, something new. And it is the law of all progress that it is made only by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances acting on your own goodwill, will make you tomorrow. Only God can say what this new spirit will be. Give God the benefit of believing that His hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. Can you say amen to that? Amen. Good.